And welcome everybody to this next part of the session on desire fulfillment. Happy to have with me again today Radhika Shah Grooven. She has been teaching yoga and meditation for over 30 years. She has very deep insights, and today we are going into another session on desires.
Yeah.
Happy to have you on board.
Thank you. We're going quite deep into this topic.
Yeah, we covered already a lot of areas in the
Yeah.
previous sessions on wish fulfilling trees, razor's edge of desire fulfillment, aptas.
Yeah.
So very interesting areas. Today, it's probably one of the most interesting ones, at least for me, talking about dangers of some desire fulfillment strategies. And so let's dive in with the first aspect that we would like to explore a little bit more. And that's about affirmations. So, can affirmations actually help to achieve our dreams? And what's the difference between affirmations and the use of mantras?
Affirmations can help, but only to a limited extent because affirmations are very superficial. Anything which works with words and repetition of these words is superficial. And so it may work, it may not work, but it is not deep enough. Secondly, affirmations are just repeated by the person as a certain line, which is given, it's tailor made, custom made for you or otherwise. But instead of saying it in your own words, you are just repeating something a bit parroting, and that's not very useful. This kind of it's more like positive thinking, and positive thinking, though nobody really talks about it, has a little bit of a side to it. The shadow side of positive thinking is that you suppress anxieties, fears, etc. You suppress different aspects of your mind, and the ego develops very strong. And you think you have to do this now, and that has also got its own repercussions. Whether it's like a mantra, well, that's an interesting idea. Some people believe that affirmations are like mantras because somehow in the English language, the idea when you repeat something all the time, you say, "Oh, don't use this like a mantra. Don't use this like a mantra." So they begin to think that affirmations are kind of mantras. But the way mantras are used, mantra vidya, mantra science, is a highly developed science, an ancient science, but highly developed ancient science, which is really not just about mindlessly repeating something. It has got different kind of mantras. There are shlokas. There's different purposes behind using the mantras. And the main and the most important aspect of mantra vidya is that it is not meant to suppress, but it is meant to awaken you. And so if you use it only to repeat something constantly, and by repeating something you think you will get it, that's a fallacious thinking, because you are not going to get that. You are just, your ego is getting stronger, and all you're doing is developing your ego. And this is not a very useful way of dealing with it. It's definitely not comparable to real, true mantra practice.
So, can words then actually override deeply held self images? And is the repetition of affirmations enough to rewire your desires?
I do not believe that that is possible, because words are, as I mentioned earlier, very superficial. In order to rewire yourself, you would have to start working with images, and eventually, that's the gold standard. You need to start working with emotions. And that's where the problem lies, because these are safely locked away in the unconscious mind. As I mentioned, that the secret is going to remain a secret. And merely repeating affirmations is not useful. It is not enough to rewire. In fact, I think that repeating such affirmations can actually be damaging or counterproductive because you develop a strong expectation that this has to work. And when it doesn't, it can be also very frustrating.
Yeah.
And you know that living in a state of discontentment is very harmful to us, both physically, mentally, emotionally, in all aspects of life.
What is distinguishing then pleasure-seeking desires from security-seeking desires? Are we being trained to want more rather than understand ourselves?
Oh, definitely. The way life has changed in the recent years, people seem to be suffering from some kind of FOMO, you know. You see somebody going somewhere and has a photo of, I don't know, been to Australia or been to Switzerland, and you think you also have to go there. So it's no longer about really about needs, but everybody feels they have to compete with others. And one of the surest and the best methods of being miserable in life is to compare yourself with others. So when you start looking at other people's lives, and who knows how much is true of that, social media, you tend to post all sorts of things, but then when you examine them in detail, you find out there's not much truth in it. And so when you imagine that somebody has something which you desire, envy takes over, then it's no longer about needs. It's not about security. It's about wanting more and more and more, developing a state of discontentment. Desire should be about self knowledge and wisdom. When you have self knowledge and wisdom, you know what desires to fulfill and which are not useful. In this way, we can then distinguish between security related and pleasure oriented. And not everything that's pleasure oriented is bad. I mean, it's nice to enjoy a few things in life. Definitely, you should. It's maintaining the awareness and the discrimination to choose and to what extent you want to live out those pleasure seeking desires.
Past sessions, we talked about worldly desires, family, wealth, recognition, and there's also a fourth desire, the desire for liberation. Is this desire for liberation truly different from the other desires? Can you comment on this?
In fact, it is not really very different from the other desires. However, these days it has been a bit lost. We have got so flooded with external stimuli and desiring, envying what others have, that we have forgotten to look inward. Due to the lack of self knowledge, we have forgotten the fourth desire. I mentioned also in one of our previous sessions that desires are basically samskaras that need to be lived out. And we should imagine them like a stream or a river which has two banks. On one side, we have the worldly desires, and on the other hand, we have the desire for liberation, self knowledge. And both go hand in hand, both go together. You don't have a river with one bank, a river has two banks, they go together. Unfortunately, today, people have forgotten about this other shore altogether. And this is why they suffer. They are lost in these worldly desires and in a race to fulfill some of these. And because of this, they suffer even more.
When we do our spiritual practices, Do our desires then intensify? And if yes, why is that so?
Indeed, they do intensify. And the reason is not that spiritual practice is creating desires or intensifying them in that sense. It's just that you're becoming aware of your desires. And that is a good thing. With greater awareness, you can choose which ones to fulfill and which ones to uncolor, let go, abandon, give up, surrender. And so, spiritual practice, when done systematically, will lead to an apparent intensification of desire. But what it is actually doing is just making you more aware of the desires. Then you are not blindly following what the crowd tells you, not giving into your FOMO and going off to places like, I don't know, Australia or something, just because, your second cousin went. But instead, you come to the conclusion that you would rather go on a nice, quiet holiday somewhere where you can just relax and recover from all the stresses of life and not create more excitement and adventure in your life. It's a matter of choice. With awareness, you can choose.
Talked about suppressed desires, and how do these suppressed desires actually distort spirituality? And can the desire for freedom itself become a bondage?
That's a pretty deep question. First of all, what is spirituality? And I say that spirituality and spiritual lifestyle are two different things. So here we are referring to really spirituality where you attain self-knowledge, get to know yourself. And in that kind of approach, it is counterproductive to suppress your desires, because when you look within, what are you going to find? Those who are looking for lights are going to be disappointed in any case. But those who look inside are going to find their emotions, their fears, their unfulfilled desires, their memories, their pain, their losses, their gains. This is what they're going to find. And how can you unfold this spirituality, which I have defined here as self-knowledge, if you are suppressing all your desires? It doesn't mean that you go and fulfill them. As I said previously, with awareness comes choice. And then you can fulfill them or not. The other form of spirituality in which you randomly just renounce things, it's called tyaga. It's external renunciation. So I don't want to enjoy my life, and I don't want to get married, or I don't want to have children, or I don't want wealth, and I don't want fame. And I'm going to sit in my dark, cold Himalayan cave and just meditate. And that can become a kind of a violence against the self, because when you do this, the desires or the ideas which come forward, if you are not able to manifest them in the real world, and by manifest them, I mean live out, then you will suffer. You have to know how to let go these internally. And if you haven't been trained in that, then this is going to lead to disease and sickness. So suppression of desire through renunciation, external renunciation, can become really distorted and very harmful. The idea that you mentioned, that the desire for freedom itself can become a bondage, yes, that is true. However, that is only the case much, much later on the spiritual path. This is when you're a really advanced meditator. And when I say advanced meditator, I mean somebody who knows himself at the level of, also the level of the unconscious, latent unconscious mind. So when you have reached that extent, that means you're an adept. And when you're an adept, then even the desire for liberation becomes a bondage. So we're not talking about somebody who's a beginner and says, "Oh, now I'm giving up the idea of liberation because it's a bondage." You're giving up before you started, and that's not a very useful on this path.
Yeah, thanks for this encouragement. So why does actually the mind resist contentment? And can scarcity then exist among the wealthy people?
Mind resists feeling of contentment because it has not been trained. This is an untrained mind. We briefly mentioned in previous sessions about the four aspects of the mind, the four forces, which are often going in different directions, and such a disorganized mind can never be content. It's jumping from here to there. It's what people call the monkey mind, jumping here and there. And you want to train your mind. You want to help the mind become coordinated. And when it's trained and coordinated, you also train it to be content. And when it is content, the feeling of abundance comes. And when there's a feeling of abundance and there's no fear of loss, then naturally things come to you which are beautiful and auspicious. And as for scarcity existing among the wealthy, that is what we meant when I said that if you don't know how to deal with wealth and success, then you will experience scarcity. That's because of your fear of loss. So you can be very wealthy, but if you're constantly afraid of losing your wealth, or you're successful, but you're constantly afraid of losing your success, or you have a family and partner, but you're constantly afraid of losing that love in your life, then you will experience scarcity or poverty. And when I say poverty, I don't necessarily mean only related to finance, or I mean poverty in the sense of a lack. You're experiencing that scarcity of love, scarcity of success, whatever it may be. But even those who have will experience it when the duality comes forward again, the opposite rises. And if you don't know how to deal with that, you will experience it.
Leads me to my last question for today's session. What remains actually when nothing is wanted? And can one live fully without wanting anything?
That's a state of desirelessness. And that can happen only when there are no samskaras left anymore. So your unconscious mind is, so to speak, empty. In previous sessions, I talked about the yogic anatomy of life, which is a diagram which sums it all up. And the Yoga Sutras illuminated, the book explains this in great detail. The path we can take to attain the state of desirelessness, which is liberation, kaivalya, moksha. And such a being is a highly evolved being. So you have Jivan Muktas, you have a person with apt, one-pointed mind, you have Jivan Mukta, you have Siddhas, and then you have the one who's fully liberated. And that is, the Yoga Sutra is called Prakriti Layas. And if such a person chooses to come back, this person is called Avtara. In fact, this would be in fact a topic for by itself. It's a very fascinating topic. It's quite wonderful to think about these highly evolved beings. And for that, a state of desirelessness is required, which is also a state of complete absolute contentment. Be happy where you are with what you have. Doesn't mean you don't do anything. That is another little paradox where people do not know, even the wise very often do not know the difference between contentment and satisfaction. When you get about, we mentioned about 60, 70, 80% of what you desire, you're content. You don't have to strive anymore. But you need to train your mind to be content.
It's a wonderful conclusion for today's session. So today we explored the dangers in desire fulfillment. And thanks for sharing your deep insights